Okay. All right, friends, I think we're going to start. Okay, everyone's here. Good. Okay, so we're in Yud B'Tammuz, beginning the 3 weeks, going to Tisha B'Av. I know for me, very often, whenever I get to any of these fast days, I think backwards about different fast days that I experienced. And I would have to tell you that one of my most powerful Tisha B'Avs was when I think I was 18 years old, okay? I was a counselor in sleepaway camp, which is, I know is not the thing in this community. I was a counselor in sleepaway camp, Camp Dina, and Tisha B'Av was coming, and for some reason, me and my fellow counselors, we're all girls camp, we said, we have to make this the best Tisha B'Av that this girl experienced. So we spent weeks asking ourselves, what do we have to do? What do we have to do to make sure that everybody understands the depth of the pain and the mourning and the rupture that these days signify? We actually created like a live exhibit. So you could walk by and there were like frozen figures from the Inquisition, from the Second Temple, from the pogroms, and you could talk to them. And at the end of that Tisha B'Av, I said, wow, we really made a difference. We were able to help people understand the suffering and the pain of this day. Now, to tell you the truth, I really, really look at those days and I feel a lot of nostalgia. And I miss them. The reason that I miss them, and I think I'm speaking for all of us here right now, is that we right now live in a completely different time. Yud B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, the 3 weeks, mourning destruction, pre-October 7th and post-October 7th is completely different. We do not have the same need right now to recreate historical catastrophes as if our people haven't just experienced so much of this in recent memory. We are living in a different time. Yud B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av this year are different. And the question that I want us to think, the framing question that we are going to think about today is, what does it mean to go through Yud B'Tammuz, to get ready for Tisha B'Av this year in life after October 7th? Life, I would say, in which we have tasted the bitterness of Jewish history that many of us thought we were mourning as something from the past. That's going to be the framing question. Before we go there, I like to make this a little bit, I don't like monologues. I actually just want to invite you to turn to somebody next to you, okay? If you're on Zoom, you can turn to someone next to you, or I don't know. Journal, okay? Let's take a minute or two. Really, as we are going into this period right now, reflecting in this reality post-October 7th, what are some things that you have in mind right now? How are you going into it this year? What are you carrying with you? Okay? So just inviting you right now, turn to somebody next to you, and let's reflect for a minute or two. Everybody has to do it, okay? If there's no one next to you, get up and move, exercise. Okay. Let's take one more minute. Okay, we're gonna come back here. Part of the reason why we're doing this is that, and I'm not saying anything that's a chidush right now, but we all know this. We don't want to just go through the Jewish calendar. We want to bring everything that we have experienced and really go through the Jewish calendar in a way that everything means something to us, that transforms us, and in which we use what we are seeing to approach not holidays, but the days of commemoration in a deeper and more impactful way. We have to be different people as we go through these days. We have to really let them shape us. And part of what we have to do is understand how does our moment inform the way that we are approaching them. So I want to offer a thesis, an idea, okay? And then I have to actually try to prove it. What I want us to think about today a little bit is the Yud Zayin B'Tammuz specifically. I'm not going to go to Tisha B'Av yet. Yud Zayin B'Tammuz specifically, our fast day today, that it contains within it ideas and lessons that are not only about destruction and that are not only about mourning, but that actually give us a constructive way to think about repair, okay? That actually push us as we are going through it. Yes, we are sad, we are fasting. We're gonna be even more sad going to Tisha B'Av, okay? So we have that entire aspect of mourning. But so part of how Chazal, the rabbis, instituted and constructed these days were not for us to just go through them and be sad, even though it's really important, but actually to go through them and ask ourselves, how do we use the DNA of this day to bring us closer to national repair? And I want to argue that specifically Yud Zayin B'Tammuz has lessons that are particularly important to us in this post-October 7th moment, okay? So that's the thesis. We're gonna put that aside now, and we're gonna ask some other questions and then eventually get there. Okay, so let's think together. What happened according to the rabbis? What happened on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz? Tisha B'Av, it's going to be when the temples were burned. We're not there yet. Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. According to Chazal, 5 things happened.
Walls were broken, Tamid was stopped.
Okay, good. I wrote it down just in case I forget because I have bad memory. Good. Luchol were broken. Good. Meraglim Tisha B'Av. Okay, yeah, I'm just going to read them just so we have it all together. According to Mishnah and Ta'anit, okay? So the tablets are broken. The Tamid Korban was paused. Uvkei, the walls were breached. The Torah scroll was burned, and there was an idol put in the temple. Okay? What happened on Tisha B'Av? According to Chazal, 5 things happened on Tisha B'Av, so in 3 weeks. We have the sin of the spies, and the decree that they won't go into the land of Israel. Great. Both Beit HaMikdash, good, so we're up to 3. 2 more. The city was plowed, so Jerusalem was plowed. That was a national way by the Romans to humiliate the Jews, and also almost to declare like this will not get rebuilt again. We're going to plow it. And Betar, which was like the last holding, like stronghold of the rebels under Bar Kokhba, was conquered. Okay, so we have all of these different national calamities and catastrophes that, according to Chazal, occur in these 2 days. Now, I want us to think about the following. If we think about Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, each of them contains a catastrophe, a sin, that happened in the Midbar, in the wilderness. On Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, we talk about the broken tablets. Now, what is the sin at the core of that? Chet HaEgel. So the sin of the golden calf, that's like the sin that we are thinking about on Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. On Tisha B'Av, it's, like Lauren said, Chet HaMeraglim. Okay, are we thinking about that? We have Chet, so 3 weeks. We're only looking at one of each of 5 calamities in each of those days. Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, we're looking at Chet HaEgel, broken tablets, and Tisha B'Av, we're looking at Chet HaMeraglim. Yeah, we're thinking about both? Good. Now, I had a question this year about this, and I was a little bit annoyed with myself that I hadn't thought about this before. Because it's a very, very obvious question. Almost like too obvious. Like we should be thinking about these things a little bit more deeply. The question is as follows, and I want us to think about this together right now. There is, in one way, we can talk about these 3 weeks, and we say, oh, here we have Chet HaEgel, here we have Chet HaMeraglim, right? Both bad things. The two lowest moments of the Jewish people in the wilderness, right? Two lowest moments, do we agree with that? Yeah? So does it make sense that they bracket this time of mourning? Good. The question we should be asking though is as follows. Even though these are two sins that bracket this period of mourning, and these are the two lowest moments for the Jewish people in the wilderness, the sins and their consequences are completely different. They're completely different, no? I really want us to think together. How are they different? Well, let's think Chet Egel, okay? So we have this worshipping of the golden calf. The tablets are broken. It's really not good. But what happens afterwards? Sam reminds us they are forgiven. Not only are they forgiven, but that entire process of forgiveness ends up becoming institutionalized as a precedent for the Jewish people until today, that we can be forgiven. Okay? Yom Kippur. Okay? The entire consequence of that afterwards, it's a process of forgiveness. Not only that, we have one set of broken tables, but then what do we have afterwards? Second pair of luchot. Are we getting to that a little bit right now? It's a tragedy, it's a calamity, it's a low point, but what comes afterwards is forgiveness. Not only that, but it is not seen in the same way as Chet HaMeraglim. Chet HaMeraglim, again, think a little bit differently. Chet HaMeraglim, the spies come back, scout spies, 10 of the 12 say, I'm just reminding all of us, it was a couple of weeks ago that we read it, happened longer ago. But 10 of the 12 spies say it's not a good land, we cannot go, we should have, we are not able to actually conquer it. And then we have the crying. And according to both the text in the Chumash and also the way Chazal view this day, what is the consequence of Chet HaMeraglim? Disaster. It's a disaster. Share a little bit more, guys. Come on. Stay in the desert. Okay? Number one, this is, and it's actually very acute. It's very acute. God, there is actually a conversation about forgiveness, but actually the commentators, some commentators argue they weren't forgiven here the way that they were in the golden calf, but that it's almost like Hashem decrees that entire generation of adult Jews will die in the wilderness. God is exchanging one generation for another. There is no redemption for that generation in terms of being able to enter the promised land. Not only that, but it gets even worse. Because how do Chazal, again, think about Chet HaMeraglim? Tisha B'Av, right? So we have a famous statement by Chazal in which we are told the people are crying. They are crying, the families are crying. Okay, and they don't only say we don't want to go, they say we wanna why you leave Egypt? Want to go back to what happened here? And according to Chazal, Hashem sits and says, you are crying b'chiyah shel chinam. So think about sinat chinam, okay, b'chiyah shel chinam, crying without real cause. What's going to happen? I will give you b'chiyah ledorot. This is going to become a day of national mourning for your descendants. There's something, so again, we can get afterwards into questions of free will and how does history develop, so that's for a different conversation. But in almost a simple, a little bit shallow understanding of this, the sin, the catastrophe, the brokenness is so acute, it is so bad that it ends up breaking something that remains broken generationally. There's a trauma there that becomes engraved and ingrained in the way the Jewish history develops. So we have these 2 days, two sins in the wilderness, but very, very, very different way of understanding them. So the question that I had this year was, I don't get it. I want to make sure that we all understand the question. And if you disagree with the question, let me know. The question that I had this year is how do I understand the fact that we have two national calamities that bracket the 3 weeks of national mourning for the Jewish people, but one of them seems to be much more an episode of brokenness and repair, and one of them is just like brokenness and despair. Okay, we can just call it a little bit like that. How do we put differently? I'm gonna ask this in two other ways. One way to ask this is, why is it that Chet HaEgel, worshipping the golden calf, right after the theophany, divine revelation at Sinai, and entering a covenant with the Almighty, okay? Not a small thing. Why is it that Chet HaEgel has one type of consequence, and Tisha B'Av, Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies, has another? Does that question resonate? Are we all together there? Yeah? Okay, good. The second way we can ask this question is, what's the message? How are we supposed to understand the relationship between these two sins in the wilderness in the way they bracket these 3 weeks? Does that question make sense as well? Yeah? Okay, we're all good? Okay. So let's think together. Let's think. We should think about what we know about the narratives in the Torah in general. I want us to think for a second. By the way, have we thought about this before? I'm like, why shouldn't we all, we should be thinking about these two national catastrophes and sins, but with very different consequences. Let's think. Why is it? Someone comes to me and says, hey, it's two national catastrophes, calamities, sins in the wilderness. One is bad, but there's a process of repair. One is awful, and it becomes ingrained as this forever kind of thing. Why is that? Why is it about both episodes that have such different consequences? That's the question. I want us to think about this together right now. Okay? So I'm inviting you to... Yeah, and just say your name. I don't know everybody say.
Hi, I'm Zach.
Zach, nice.
Chet HaMeraglim, the whole idea is that they're actually doubting Hashem himself, that he's able to protect Bnei Israel and allow them to conquer the land. With Chet HaEgel, though, they're doubting this connection between Moshe and Hashem. They're misunderstanding that it's Hashem who's really calling the shots, not Moshe. So it's not a fundamental doubt in Hashem. It's a misunderstanding on Bnei Israel's part that can be easily rectified by continuing to show that Hashem's really behind it all, not just Moshe. With Meraglim, they're actually not trusting Hashem to fulfill his promise.
Great. So Zach says something that many modern and classical commentators mention, which is there is a difference between outright, let's say, betrayal or outright rejection. So I can, God forbid, say I'm going to reject God, I'm going to reject the covenant, and the Kuzari brings this up, Rabbi Yehuda Levi, and there's a difference between saying, actually, this wasn't an outright, in Chet HaEgel, it wasn't an outright rejection of God. It was a mistake. The mistake was, and it's not a good mistake, okay? But and it reminds me of how Maimonides describes the beginning of idolatry. Back in Abraham's time, in Bereshit, Maimonides says a lot of this was basically trying to find the intermediary to God, okay? So there's something here that reminds me of that. The mistake can be, we're not rejecting Hashem with Chet HaEgel. We're not doing that right now. We are a people who were slaves in Egypt. We never had an invisible God, in a way that we weren't raised in a society with an invisible, all-powerful God. We're in Egyptian society. And we associated Hashem with Moshe, because that's all we knew. And then Moshe goes up the mountain, and Moshe's not coming back, and we need some help. We're not rejecting God and everything, we just need some help. And if we need some help, then it's still bad. It's still idolatry, it's still avodah zarah, it's still absolutely forbidden and punishable, but it's a little bit different because it's not rejecting God, it's a mistake in how to approach God. So that's one way to understand why there's a difference. I want to hear more, but you know what? Let's do like this. Turn to the person next to you. Think a little bit. In addition to what Zach said, okay? Do you have any other guesses? You can journal again. Do you have any guesses? Any guesses, thoughts, educated guesses from what we know about why this was so different? The consequence of both national sins. So. Okay, let's see if there's a couple of ideas that have come up. A couple of people, if you want to share what came up. Why is there a difference between the two sins and the consequences?
What I heard, this is a few things that I heard. That, for example, not for example, in the Cheta Egel, the Yetzirah, he showed them like an image. And this is what commentators said, that they showed them an image of Moshe dying, so they needed another connection, another way. And the only way that they used to, the same thing like you said, the only way that they used to communicate in those, it was with an Egel. So they said, because they're coming from Egypt, that this is the only way that they used to connect with Hashem. So they right away, they saw this is the way to make another leader for us, another connection with Hashem, like a pipe. To go straight to Hashem.
Great, what's your name?
Celia.
Celia's saying something a little bit similar to Zach. It was a mistake, not a betrayal.
Okay,
Great.
and the other one, what I heard from commentators too, is, and I don't know how true is this, but I heard that in the Meraglim, even though they were the biggest leaders in that generation, the biggest ones, the 10 of them that they thought that in the desert they were learning Torah constantly. That was the only thing that they were doing. They were because everything was given to them. The manna, they used to do everything that they had. The ananea kavod, they had everything. So when they went to the land, they said, "Oh, they're gonna have to relinquish this time of Torah to be to work the land because they have to start because Hashem told them once you're there, you have to."
Right.
Get your own food, your own things. So they said it's better not to. So they did not trust Hashem that I'm telling you this is good for you, and they said no, we're gonna think the other way. We're not gonna say whatever Hashem is telling us. We're gonna protect Torah.
Right. So there's something about that being like a lack of emunah, and like a lack of faith, and like a direct rejection of what Hashem said. I'm just looking at the watch, so I'm not going to take more responses. I'm just going to share some of the responses that I've seen. I'm going to add some more, okay? And by the way, this is part of what learning is, that we can come up with a lot of answers and think about many different reasons why there might be different punishments. So one answer that was given already is one is direct betrayal versus a mistake. Another answer, and this actually Rabbi Sabato said this in one of the Sefer Torah. Sorry, just looking at Jessica Sislam with Rabbi Sabato. Is that the sin of Cheta Egel was a sin that was out of character. He said this was like they were generally good. This was like out of character. It was an exception. But when he looked at the Meraglim, at that point with sins in the Midbar, that becomes not an exception to the rule, but it becomes their character. So it's almost like an initial reaction. It's like, oh, it's the first time you mess up. This might not be who you are yet. Versus like, wow, your generation, that this represents your essence. This is not going to work in terms of doing like a repair process. Some other responses that I saw, sorry, just like wrote them down somewhere. One was around action versus intent. The Cheta Egel, like again, bad action, but positive intent. Technical levels of maturity, all of that. One commentary I saw, and by commentary I also mean like modern commentators who are like writing responses, was saying the reason that Chet HaMeraglim was worse is that, I want to try to say it like this, if they're forgiven for Chet HaEgel, they were expected to have learned their lesson, okay? So that's why it's almost like, well, like you were supposed to learn your lesson from this whole thing. So now I can forgive you, but in this case, like you really haven't internalized your lesson. So the punishment is going to be different, and it's going to lead one to another. Okay, I want to offer one more frame to think about this, okay? And this is something that I have been thinking about with eyes shaped by October 7th. All right? And let me just say one more sentence about that. This thinking about Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, Chet HaEgel, all these things in relation to October 7th, I just want to name that it's not a perfect parallel, right? Because we are talking here about sins, about national inequities that have to do with internal wrongdoing, okay? When we talk about October 7th, there are, of course, the monsters who attacked. You understand what I'm saying? There's the external enemies. So in that way, October 7th and the time we're living in right now, the questions around anti-Semitism and how to deal with so much Jew hatred, there's closer parallels to, let's say, the destruction of the temples, where you have the Romans and the Babylonians. But I do want to focus, so I'm just being very careful about what I'm saying right now. At the same time, I think I will speak for most people that I know, that there's something about this moment in which we're thinking not only about our external enemies, but we're thinking a lot about who we are internally. And what we saw has been broken internally. Where are places where we expected there to be good leadership, that there wasn't? Where are places in Israel and in America where we thought we were prepared for certain threats and we weren't? Where are places where we're supposed to be united? You understand what I'm saying right now? So I want to look at this without pretending like the external enemies don't exist, okay? Yeah? We all got, okay, good. So I work in a lot of very progressive spaces where there's a very strong push to pretend like we don't have external enemies. You get what I'm saying? So I'm very, very careful, even as we want to learn lessons from the rabbis about the need for self-reflection, to not, God forbid, pretend like we don't have the external enemies. And it's important for us to name that. If there's anybody in college right now over here or going to college, important to stand and to say, yes, we get to talk about what we did wrong, but we get to do that, not you. You get to help us defeat our enemies, okay? And talk about the injustice done to our people. So I want to just add one more layer to thinking about the differences. I'm going to talk about who did, so I'm going, again, just reminding all of us, talking about the sins, Egel, Meraglim, and why we had different consequences, yeah? We're all, okay. We had some ideas that came up. I'm adding a little bit more. I want to think about who did the sin and how did the people react to the sin, okay? I want to compare and contrast. When it comes to, I'm going to start with Chet HaMeraglim. So I'm doing this chronologically wrong, but it's just a little bit easier. Chet HaMeraglim. Chet HaMeraglim, the sin begins with leaders. Like Celia, like it begins with leaders, okay? But as we continue reading the narrative, we see there what I would call an element of social contagion. Social contagion. Contagion is like a, yeah, you know contagion, okay? In Spanish, contagioso. It's social contagion. There's something here that begins, it's almost like if you can imagine like the movie, I always like try, I'm like, there's 10 men that go this way, they have an audience, okay, the Edah that is, and they're able, it's almost like a populist, like, they're able to bring their fear, their anxiety, their rejection of the promised land, and they transfer it to the people. And the people take it. We hear about the Edah, and then the word uses the Am, okay? And then al-mishpechotav. Okay, so we have here an element of contagion. It starts with leadership, but it ends up permeating. According to the Sforno, every individual. It ends up permeating everybody. So we can talk about Chet HaMeraglim as being a national calamity, that even though it started with broken and bad and tragic leadership, it ends up taking over the entire people. Or like the entire people. Okay? I'm going to go back to Chet HaEgel and then I'm going to do this again. Chet HaEgel, think a little bit about how many people were killed afterwards as a consequence of the sin. What? 3,000. We have 3,000, I think it was men. We have 3,000 men, important to note, men, women, or people, okay? We have in this case 3,000 men who are killed by Moshe and whoever Moshe brought with him, that are killed as a consequence of Chet HaEgel. I'll quote here the Kuzari again. According to the Kuzari, this was contained. It was 3,000 people. arguably it was the Erev Rav, okay? It wasn't, we didn't have there, even though it was a national calamity because it happened so soon after Sinai. And because it was like a golden calf, like it's like the first command, the first divra, the first utterance in the Decalogue. Commandment is like a American, Western, whatever. This first utterance in the Decalogue, literally, is like, don't make for yourself a graven image. So it was awful, but it was contained. It was 3,000 people, right? Maybe it was like a sector of society. We do not read here that this was like a popular kind of calamity. That's one difference. I'm going to bring another difference. Second difference that I noticed, okay, just from reading the Pshat or just thinking about it, is the following. After Chet HaMeraglim, so I'll go chronologically in the wrong order again. After Chet HaMeraglim, after God tells Moshe, God's like, want to destroy everybody, Moshe begs for forgiveness, God says, I'm going to forgive, but everyone's going to die, okay? And then when the people hear this, they regret it. They do regret it. And then do you remember how they tried to fix it? You have the Ma'apilim. You have what I would say with my own language, an impulsive, spontaneous, like, oh my gosh, we messed up. Let's fix this right away. Okay? Let's go up right now. Of course, it fails. Moshe tells them, Hashem didn't command this, don't. They do it anyways, and they get destroyed by the neighboring nations, those who went as a Ma'apilim. It's a very, very tragic story, right? But again, this I would say, I'm using my own words here, this is an attempted process of repair that is impulsive, spontaneous, and not trying to think through the deep roots of what happened. So think for a second about human relationships, and you can put whatever human relationship you want in your mind. So you have a big fight with, let's just say like a friend, a big fight that goes to the core of your relationship, and they do this grand gesture that feels completely empty because it has nothing to do with what it takes to repair the relationship. Okay? Go back to Chet HaEgel. What happens afterwards? And it's all led by Moshe through Hashem's instructions. But we have a long process of repair. We have not only the second tablets, not only does Hashem gift us with the formula that eventually becomes Yom Kippur, but according to different commentators, we have the Mishkan, the tabernacle. And I want us to think for a second about this, because we say, it's like we read, the Mishkan comes after Chet HaEgel. I want you to think for a second sociologically, okay? What does this mean for a national project? It means that you had a people, and you had something broken, but then it's a project. Everybody has to contribute. That was the secret of the Mishkan, to the extent that it's the first and from what I know, the only time in Jewish history that we had to stop donations coming in. You know what I mean? Because everybody gave, and it wasn't man. Everybody saw this repair project, and even though it was a group that messed up, the people took responsibility. A little bit the opposite of the Meraglim. Meraglim is the people mess up, a group tries to fix in the wrong way. Here, a group sins. The people take it upon themselves. Not only that, it's a collective project. There's unity. The Mishkan is a project of unity. It's a project that says everybody belongs, everybody matters, everybody is important, because we need a donation of every single person. And Hashem says so, Ve'asu li Mishkan, V'shachanti betocham. Hashem does not dwell, right? It's not V'shachanti betocho, or within this structure. Who does Hashem dwell in? The people. There's something here about the people. One more thing to keep in mind, the Mishkan is not a one-day project. It's not an impulsive hey, we messed up, we're gonna fix it right away, and it's all gonna go back to normal. The Mishkan is a massive building project that takes a long time, and that communicates to the people, yes, there's repair, but it involves real process of thinking, we're gonna work together, and we are going to spend the time necessary to make this be a project that gets us to a better place and that hopefully helps us repair some of the sin of the golden calf. There's an opinion in Chazal that says that the reason that we have the broken tablets in Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the reason that we have Chet HaEgel in the sage's description of this mourning period is davka to give us hope within these days. Is that davka, as we are entering this time of mourning and this time of thinking about national suffering and calamities, that we have already at the beginning a reminder that not all calamities are the same, and that we have, this to me is the most important here, that we have the agency and the responsibility and the ability to think about internal brokenness. I'm not talking about the enemies right now, but to think about internal brokenness and to figure out how do we react. For me, by the way, my hope, my silver lining, my source of strength after October 7th has been 100% the formula of repair that we see after Chet HaEgel. What do I mean by this? Again, enemies aside, looking internally. I think about Israel, okay? And Israel is not a different country, it's our people. We think about Israel, all of the brokenness, and put inside your mind what you think. By the way, part of the challenge is that we disagree over exactly what is the brokenness and who's responsible for it. But that's for a different conversation. Think about the brokenness. I think we can all agree that there have been places where there hasn't been leadership. And there has been places where people have not behaved the right way. And there are machlokot, there are meribot, there are fights within our people that if left untreated can lead us into calamity and into tragedy. I think we can all agree on that, right? But think about Chet HaEgel. There's a sector that carries the sin, but you look at the people, and generally the people are good. The people of Israel, what we have seen in terms of the civic spirit of the people, there's a statement that people say if you read Israeli news, or if I'm on Israeli Twitter, so like I feel like that's my one of my entry points to Israeli discourse. Lo naflu midor tashach. Have you heard this? Lo naflu midor tashach is this generation of young Israelis is not short or less, I'm not translating it perfectly, but it's not any lesser than the generation of 1948, okay? Actually saying it might be an even greater generation of 1948. So much of the public discourse, if you read rabbis and thought leaders, many of them say, we thought this was the I generation, the iPhone generation, the me, selfish generation, the generation that was too entitled to do anything. And then we look around us, and again, there's a lot of brokenness, but we look at the people, at the civic spirit of volunteerism, of getting up, of going and fighting, whether it's in the army or in civic society, and we see something amazing. And I think part of what we see here, if we do this right, if our people do this right, and I want to speak about America in a second, if our people do this right, if we are led by the right people, if we take the lessons of history seriously, then part of what this generation is supposed to do is to understand that we need a Mishkan process, that it's not going to happen overnight. That if we think the repair is going to be like this and we're going to go back to what it was next year, what it was before, it's not going to work. We need the kind of leadership and the kind of people, I don't mean institutional leadership, I mean people who get up and who say we're going to make things better. That's what I mean by leadership. We need, and we have the potential leadership that are willing to say, we are going to be the generation that constructs the Mishkan. The generation that understands there has to be a collective process, a process that takes time, but a process that can take one of the lowest points of the Jewish people and says we are going to somehow move forward and we're going to create precedents for repair. I want to say something about our time in America right now. There's so many differences between what's happening in Israel and what's happening in America, but it's important to note something here as well. And I'll speak right now at least about what I see with I work with a lot of young American Jews in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And I will tell you, even with all of the darkness and all of the brokenness and all of the challenges, part of what we have seen, I'm not the only one, there's polls showing this, part of what we have seen everywhere, in our communities, is we have seen an awakening. And I want to think about you, think each one of us, about moments in which we felt that we are moved to do something, in which we felt there are problems, and if we keep waiting for someone to fix them, nothing's going to happen. And actually, there is something that we, in our place, with our abilities, in our circles, can do to make things better. We have seen the Spirit here as well. And part of what we have to do in these 3 weeks, thinking between Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av, is actually ask ourselves, how can I be part of the solution? How can I make sure that I enter this time, both with mourning and being sad and thinking about the tragedy, but also taking seriously and to heart the lessons of Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and of the broken tablets, and that we have the ability to take a national calamity, and if we make the right choices, to somehow go into a period of national repair. This, I believe, is the message of Chazal, one of the messages in Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, and hopefully a message that can bring us, we talk about Tisha B'Av as the lowest day, but a day in which, God willing, will one day transform into redemption. So I want to wish all of us a meaningful Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, and that, God willing, we shall get closer to Geulah. Thank you.